Hello, everyone, and a huge thank you for joining us today for a discussion on an engineer's guide to making sense of log data. This is a lead dev webinar created in partnership with logs.io. This webinar will last roughly 45 minutes, after which myself and the panelists will head over to the lead dev Slack to answer some of your questions in the continuous learning channel. We may also have time to answer a couple of questions live, so if you use the Q&A feature on Zoom, we'll try to get to those towards the end. So let's get started with some introductions. I'll start. I'm the moderator today. My name is Matt Hawthorne. I'm currently an independent engineer and consultant based in the Philadelphia region. I've previously worked at Twitter and Netflix, focused on AI ML infrastructure and backend distributed systems. And I've recently published the early release of my first book, Push to Prod or Die Trying. So let's meet our panelists. Tanvi, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Matt. Thank you for introducing yourself. Yes, my name is Tanvi. I'm one of the senior managers working with Amazon Web Services. I've been with AWS for over 9 years. And when I started my journey as a support engineer with AWS troubleshooting, logs was something that was super close to the day-to-day bread and butter of a support engineer. So I'm super excited to be a part of this panel to talk about how to make sense of logs and how are they scaling and how the modern cloud infrastructure is changing our abilities to look at logs. So super excited to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, Tanvi. Nilesh, you want to introduce yourself?
Hey, I'm Nilesh. I'm currently an engineer at Datavant, where I mostly look at things related to our product, which is very close to the life sciences industry. My experience and my sort of expertise has been in data platform and data product building. Logs has always been a key part of that journey, whether it be in startups or large companies. So I've seen some of those good and bad days within logs. So it's exciting to come here and talk about it and hopefully share any insights that might be useful to you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks, Nilesh. Last but not least, Asaf, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you very much. So my name is Asaf, and I'm the CTO of a co-founder of logs.io. As you can understand from our name, a lot of what we do is around logging. We've been doing it for more than 10 years and a lot of experience working with thousands of companies around it. I think for us, when we see it, logs is obviously the easiest, it's simplest thing to develop and to emit from any software development that's being done, but it's also the most cryptic and more hard to understand after the fact. So I'm happy to be here and give some of our experience by working with customers and obviously our own experience using logs.
Thanks, Asaf. All right, so let's jump into our questions. First one, what's the one piece of advice you would give to a startup developing their logging strategy from scratch? And instead of a startup, if you wanted to imagine a large company that just wanted to revisit its logging strategy, that's fine too. Nilesh, can you start the answers?
Yeah, I think logs in general are very important to the company, whether it be small or large. But approaching this has differences based on what kind of setup you have, what kind of business you run. For startups, there are different constraints versus a larger company. So I'll cover the startup first, possibly. In a startup, you don't want to actually approach it with a sort of limitless mindset, like have everything open. I think you have to be very tactful, very precise as a startup. You have to be meaningful. These logs have to actually you should actually derive a lot of the value from it. So I would recommend starting small and being very focused to what you intend to derive from them. This could be just user insights, how the app is working, or how your product is doing in general. And logs can tell you a decent story from there. Whereas in a larger company, you may have been 10 years in the business, 20 years in the business. You have a lot of looking back to do and a lot of insights you can derive from your own usage of logs and how you've sort of collected over the years. So I think there's, they say hindsight is 20/20, but you go back and look, okay, has this been really useful and has that derived the value that we intended to be? Or it's just been excessive or over the top. And so that gives you an opportunity to rethink. And so strategizing in a large company may mean pruning, removing unused logs, like cleaning up a lot of these tooling maybe that's duplicated possibly. So that's the two approaches, at least at the basic level I would approach it. Anything more specific would have to do very specific to the business, the use case, the industry. But in general, I think being more strategic and pragmatic on approaching these logs would really help in the long run.
Do you have anything to add to that, Tanvi?
No, I think Nilesh is spot on, right? Like, and as we progress, I think we can peel the onion a bit more about how to look at some of these things and how the systems are getting complex and the size of the logs is increasing, and we can dive a bit more into log management as we progress. But for now, I think Nilesh hit the nail on the head.
Okay. Asaf, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think we rarely see any large companies going through the logs and understanding what is actually needed and what is not needed. So this is something that I think it has to be thought out when you start a company, or even for large companies when you start a team or a new product development that's being done. I think from our experience, the best thing to do is have a very clear structure on how the logs are formatted and not just say whatever text you want to say. Have an understanding of what are the fields that should happen in the log. So if you're running in a Kubernetes environment, you better include the cluster, the node, the pod name, the deployment, and everything that you need in order to better understand where it's coming from later on. So having a structure is a good thing, not all for the entire log line, but for the fields that you want. You also need to understand which logs are being used as logs and which logs are being used as metrics. Because these can later on be pruned with a system like Logs.io, and you don't need them. You don't need the developers to change them, but it's very important if you know that the log is actually going to be eventually being used as a metric, just mark it as such, make sure that you know how to reduce it later on, you know how to convert it into a metric and stuff like that. So having things organized, having a strategy around it, knowing the fields that you want, naming the fields in a way that makes sense, is really important when you start as a startup, also important as you start as a large company doing it.
Thanks. All right, let's move on to our next question. Do we think there is a use for AI in root cause analysis? Asaf, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, so thank you very much. So this is definitely, obviously, this comes in a very timely manner because we've just released our AI agent on Logs.io and the logging. There's been many attempts of using AI on logging and observability in general, and they all were, I would say, not performing to the satisfactory of the developers or the DevOps. So all the areas around anomaly detection, the trend around AIOps of correlating alerts to reduce the alert fatigue and stuff like that, they're all proving to be somewhat less effective than it is. I think the change that we've seen over the past year with the introduction of Gen AI and the ability to consume large amounts of data and kind of like create a root cause analysis from the logs is, I have to say, it's astonishing where it stands today. We all understand the velocity of development around Gen AI and where it would be a year from now or 2 years from now. I don't think that this is going to take it 10 years to mature, but this is going to be much quicker than that. Part of our vision around AI is going towards kind of like autonomous observability and going through the whole process of auto remediation, but no longer with playbooks and automation and scripts running, but more centralized around Gen AI, around the understanding, around automated troubleshooting, around communicating with other AI components like code, like a code whisperer and alike, to introduce code into the system as well, and also change configuration on the fly. So we do see a shift in the system and the shift in paradigm, and we believe that a couple of years from now, people would not be looking at dashboards and would not be searching logs. Most of the mundane work would be done by AI, and people would have to interpret it or check that the work that the AI did was valid and satisfactory. So that's kind of like how we see it.
Thanks. Tanvi, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think as AI makes its advances into each parts of the business, right? Like be it right from logging to increasing productivity in general, which is also simplifying of the logs, like Asaf mentioned. One thing to keep in mind is how safely you are using the AI, what accesses you are providing, and just as always, when it comes to AI, responsible usage and security should be top of mind. And I think that applies to the log strategies. And as we start using AI models to be more productive on our log management or log leveling as such in general. So just want to make sure that that plug is in there around responsible AI.
Okay. Nilesh, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think both Asaf and Tanvi addressed most of it. I just want to add that I think this, in my view, this will be a progression, not immediate. In effect, across the industry, I think there will still be human in the loop um, until these systems mature. We're seeing sort of these develop in real time and get better. But I think adoption and just like actually deriving those insights, root cause analysis, anomaly detection, like Asaf mentioned, are key valuables that come out of this. And I see especially valuable for AI to come in when you have high pressure incidents and you have, especially on call, you have a severity or some other incident, a red alert that goes on in your product, and you have very less time to react, and you need a lot of that productivity boost. So that's, I think, where including maybe the human in the loop, it makes sense for AI to help boost some of that, some of those insights and derive those value quickly. Yeah, that's pretty much all I had.
Okay.
Yeah, I want to add into this that I think I agree it is going to be a progression in the same way that, I don't know, 10 years ago, people promised autonomous cars and it's still not there. It's getting there. But I think there's been a lot of development through the development of autonomous car that got into the day-to-day use of cars. Just like the automated lane correction is something which is most people are using today. All the alerts that you get in the car when you go in, and like the proximity alerts, and it makes everything a lot safer. And it is on the path to do it. So I think like the path that's been taken with autonomous cars, it's going to take some time, but we're going to start seeing pretty immediately capabilities that are going to make engineering and DevOps more effective at the way you do it, and having the environment a lot more safe and secure and without issues. I think every environment has exceptions in them, and if you could have something in the background, no engineer is going to go and check all the exception. If you have like an AI in the background, it's going to check the exceptions, the root cause, recommend the change, already write the unit test or the integration test for it, and get you ready with a pull request. That's going to make the environments more sustainable, safer to use, and more robust in the long run. Fixing a production issue real time and allowing it to do, I don't think it's going to happen in the near future. But I think we're going to see more and more AI being introduced into observability and into DevOps in general.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting analogy. Just like a self-driving car still requires you in a driver's seat, I can imagine an AI saying, it looks like your cluster isn't large enough. Would you like me to resize it for you? Or it looks like, this cluster can't talk to this other one. Would you like me to add the security group or something like that?
Exactly.
Okay, so let's move on to the next question. If you had to pick one aspect of log management that is most often overlooked, what would it be and why? Tanvi, could you take this one?
Yes, of course. I think this is an exciting question, right? Because imagine the times where we had only one web server or only one application server and one just small setup that we were running. And it was so easy to go into those logs and just probably, like, I am more of a Linux person, so just go into those access logs or networks troubleshooting and so on and so forth. And you could just quickly figure out, like, oh, probably this is the issue, or there is a packet drop or whatever, right? But as our systems have scaled to multiple servers, and then the 3-tier web architecture scaling further, microservices coming into picture, cloud computing coming into picture, I think the most overlooked aspect of logging is a management strategy around the logs, right? And I think Nilesh touched a bit on that point at the start of the conversation too. right? So how do you maintain that log leveling? How do you manage your logs overall in your organization? And just piggybacking on Nilesh, right? Like that work backwards or strategy around log management, I think is the foundation to make sure that nothing is overlooked, right? Jumping back a bit into the question about what I have seen to be the most overlooked aspect is, let's assume from a network troubleshooting point of view, right? Like you're running your TCP trace routes and you figure out that how the hops of the packet are going. I think the most overlooked aspect is understanding the numbers around the latency and what exactly is an acceptable number of the latency, right? Because sometimes we do think that, oh, 100 milliseconds, that seems to be a lot, but actually that's a misunderstanding, right? Like in that overall packet hopping or the world tour that the packet is doing, probably 100 milliseconds is totally fine, right? So that education around that log management, I think, is one aspect. Having the log management strategy is the second. That's the foundational part. And I think the most overlooked aspect from my point of view was like understanding those trace routes or the TCP aspects of it, TCP versus UDP, and why we use those, right? And this can probably scale to the other parts of logging, right? Be it a booting system, be it your access logs, and so on and so forth. So building that foundation, I think, is extremely important as modern IT environments grow. So that's my 2 cents.
Nilesh, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think Tanvi touched on a good point of lifecycle management. One of the things I've seen is as we scale systems, like let's say Tanvi used the analogy of like going from one system, one machine to the other, to multiple. I've seen logs balloon up in size. And let's say you set like debug level, trace level, you've had a pollution of logs and your disks fill up. So you've not thought about expiration policies or log rotation or any of that. So that's, I think, one of the key pieces that people tend to forget after a certain scale. Initially, it's okay to just dump everything. I think log storage is mostly overlooked. But I think at a certain point when you grow, it's really helpful to have a more cleaner setup, having more rotation, and maybe cold storage. Some of that. That's the aspect I've seen. The disks filling up, and I had to clean up a lot of things and set up a rotation policy. So that's a personal anecdote there about log management. Pretty much the only thing I can remember at this point.
Saf, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I agree that I think the thing that is most overlooked is the scalability and the scale of the logs. I think engineers and developers, they want to log everything. They want the messages, they want everything that's happening to be logged, but they don't understand that this API call is being called all the time by anything that is using the system. Now, you have to understand the scale and the number of logs that you're going to get from each one of them. It doesn't make sense that any API call would generate one log, because then you get like too many logs, and that kind of like, it's a very common problem that people don't know what to do with them at the end. So I think this is a key thing. I have to say that personally, I haven't heard about disks or log rotation in quite a long while. I think today, where people are using cloud and using S3 or using EBS or using stuff like that. This is definitely an interesting concept, disks, but I haven't heard it in a very long time. So that's what I would say. Storage is unlimited today, which is unfortunate because people take advantage of it and they just don't understand. But when it comes to log analytics, having too much storage is also slows down the ability to search on them eventually. So collecting stuff that is not needed, collecting trash is not going to help you solve your problem quicker. It's actually going to slow you down when you actually want to have an issue. So thinking about the scale of every log line that you write, how often is it going to be written? And if the company is going to grow, you don't want to generate something that if a company grows 2x next year, then the logs are going to grow 2x because then you're going to pay twice as much for your storage, and basically you're hurting your bottom line and you're hurting your the ability of the company to generate revenue. So thinking about scalability is definitely a lot of time overlooked.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see a graph of how many times people say we ran out of disk space and how that's decreased over time, and then compare that to how many times people say why is our cloud bill so expensive and how
Yeah.
that's increased over time. And that's relevant to our next question, which is, how do we minimize the cost of log storage? In other words, how do we balance these things and amount of data per user, the number of logs that we store for how many users, and how long that we store those logs? Asaf, can you take this one?
Yeah, I think it's really important for a company to have a strategy, and it starts with the understanding that not all the services or microservices are alike. Some are more important, some are less important for the company, and the ability to tier the data and say, if I'm an e-commerce company, my payment and my shopping cart and everything to do with our transaction is critical, and I need these logs. I need to save them for 14 days, 30 days, whatever. Something that is like inventory management, yeah, it's important, but if the system is going to go down and it's going to be up tomorrow, then people are going to get their stuff a day later. It's bad, but it's not as critical as people wouldn't be able to buy stuff. So the ability to tier the data is really, really important, and the ability to understand kind of like where the data goes. Having many tiers of data today is something that we at Logs.io do, and I think other vendors do. So having a hot tier, which is really, really fast, a little bit expensive, having a warm tier, having cold tier, having a compliance tier to save all your access information is something which is critical when you manage log analytics.
Tanvi, do you have anything to add to that?
Nope, I think Asaf covered it really well on this one, so I'm good.
Okay. Nilesh, do you have anything to add?
I think one of the things that would inform you a lot of the costs for log storage is understanding how you're reading logs. I think observability in general is more write heavy than read heavy. Like you end up writing a lot of this to storage, whether you need it or not, and the access may not be exactly what you expect. Like the ratio to write to read may be hugely different. So I think that would give an insight of how much you want to store. Like I like the idea of like tiered logging. So if you want high priority logs, you can keep it for 7 days and the rest can be cold storage for like 30 days, or like if you can aggregate some of these things. I think one of the key points is also to make sure you're capturing the right thing and not everything. Like imagine putting logging for a health endpoint of a service and just like spilling into storage that's unnecessary. So a lot of that, it goes back to our strategy discussion and log lifecycle management discussion as well. So a few ways is to go back and see whether you're just dumping logs that may not be necessary, and even going back to the idea of tiering would also help serving those logs in the manner that they are desired.
Okay. So let's move on to the next question here. There are many situations in which logs are useful. For example, latency info for a specific customer, or just any errors for a specific customer, maybe any errors for any customers during an incident that could be useful, or just general non-error info, like the volume of customer sessions or the distribution of your purchased item IDs, for example. What are some techniques you use to find the information you're looking for in these different situations? Or are there any other situations in which you use logs that are worth discussing? Tanvi, can you take this one? This very long question.
Yeah. Thank you for the question, though. I think this is an important question because I've seen just to add more context right here, I've seen the way this, and Nilesh Asaf can add to it or pitch in as well, the way some of these situational occurrences around logs kind of happen has shifted a lot over time. Right now, we have so many automated things that can send us from an observability perspective the information, right? Or we can even add a lot of personalization to our observability strategies, right, to do log management or log notifications across the infrastructure that is built. And I think some of the cloud technologies have made that easier for us. And even around cost management, right, some of the errors that we can see around cost management also can be considered as logs, and the systems help us to set up our notifications better on that log management strategy, right? So going back to the original question and wearing a bit of a support kind of a hat back on, right? Going couple of years back, the way it was easier always to troubleshoot is getting into the logs itself, right? Through the terminal, through SSH, whatever your ways of getting into the system are. And then post that, what's better is you have to reduce the noise in the logs, right? And there are multiple commands that you can less the command in a Linux system, or you can probably append a couple of logs together to see how you can look at certain boot errors and so on and so forth. You can use commands to find certain keywords that might be related to the original error that you are seeing, right? So those are a couple of things that or techniques, to going back to the question here, that I have used, and I think those have translated into a philosophy of being more automated on the log management, and some of our tools now that are there can help us do that. And going back again, the foundation, I think, of our discussion today is having a strategy around these, right? Like, what are you trying to build? And if you build that, how are you managing your logs around that? And what's your strategy to look at the most important things without, or rather by filtering through the noise? So that's just my mental model of, in general, old logging techniques to mid logging techniques to now the fancy world that we live in to increase productivity.
Okay. Asaf, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is to be able to set up the logs in order to answer the question that are more common and more prevalent. So if I am using it in a support access, then I need to make sure that the customer name or the customer ID is presented in all the logs, so I can create a dashboard and I can filter that dashboard based on the customer ID or customer name. I think it goes back to the first question we talked about structure. We need to make sure that all the entire logs that I have, I call it customer ID or customer name, and it doesn't appear in different names in different log lines. So it doesn't appear as customer here and customer ID here, or ID in some places. I think solutions like Logs.io and other solutions offer you the ability to create dashboard based on logs, and so they would shorten out the cycle from the problem that you're trying to address until the solution that you get. So if I'm a support, I can create a dashboard that's going to help me understand the flow of every customer in a few clicks, instead of me searching the logs all the time over and over again. And I think it's a major change from what Tanvi mentioned about SSHing and logging into the machine and trying to build a picture. Now you can have a pre-built dashboard of safe searches and stuff like that you only need to filter, and it really saves a lot of time and energy and grief in that perspective.
Okay. Nilesh, do you have anything to add?
I think Tanvi and Asaf covered most of it. I think the one part I would think of is at scale, it would just make it harder to go into a machine or actually look into a log file. I think maybe you could use tooling that can either create a dashboard like Asaf mentioned, or even make it queryable to actually filter out some of this noise, quote unquote, in the logs. Because in normal situations, if you're just trying to look at what your app is behaving, how things are going, you're looking at metrics, it's okay. But I want to touch on incident management, when things are burning, your customers are screaming, or you have a severity. That's when these tooling really come in handy, and the ability to slice and dice and understand a lot of that insight. So yeah, it goes back to, like Asaf mentioned, the structure of the logs, where are you keeping IDs, field names correctly? Are you making sure the schema is correct, so that you know what field you're seeing is consistent across the board? If it may be named one aspect, but versus some other tooling is calling it differently, then you might have some conflicts in understanding that log itself. Yeah, that's all I have to add about.
Okay, thanks. Let's move on to the next question. With regard to logs, what are things that are hard for humans to do, but easier for software to do? For example, distinguishing symptoms from causes. We kind of talked about that a bit earlier. Or finding everything with regard to a specific customer or incident that might go across many different systems or regions, etc. Asaf, can you start this one off?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the one of the things which is easier for systems to do and difficult for people is understand like anomaly, understanding what's going on in the logs and understand the whole flow of errors and exception and what happened. I think today in the way in the scale that we are working today, it's almost not feasible for a human being to read all these logs. I mean, we run into companies that generate millions and millions every minute. So the ability to read through them is just impossible. And what a system can do well is, first of all, understand if I have a problem right now, what is relevant, what is not relevant. Can understand how to kind of like maybe do root cause analysis with using AI, but also the ability to understand the anomalies, to understand different fields, to understand the distribution of data around the log files. This is something that systems can do way, way better than human beings.
Okay. Tanvi, do you have anything to add to this?
No, I mean, like, I think Asaf has been covering all of these points really, really well, right? But I think, like, just to sum up a couple of things, that every question that we are getting into, I would love for the audience to start thinking from strategy plus productivity plus noise cancellation point of view, right? Like, bucketize the discussion probably into these three things and see how you can simplify your own log management processes. So I think that's the key takeaway up until now is what I've been processing in my mind.
Okay. Nilesh, do you have anything to add?
Not really. I think kind of in summary, both the other panelists have covered most of it, and we've done it across the past few questions as well. I think it's at scale. It's really useful to employ these software to understand, visualize, and prune through some of the logs that a human won't be able to do.
Okay. Let's move on to the next question, which is, how do we maximize the value of our logs? For example, using logs effectively to decrease incident times. Nilesh, can you speak to this one?
Yeah, I've been talking about incident all throughout this panel. I think it's been, like in my personal experience, it's been really useful for going back into logs and looking at it. I want to use an analogy that, like, I think logs tell a story of the past in a way. They tell you what your machine or your software or your product has behaved across the board, and it just gives you an insight of what has been happening. And so when you look back and you understand, okay, this is how it's behaved, it's maybe deviating from what you expected it to do, or it's aligned, but that story is told if you log enough. And so I think to maximize some of that value, you need to at least make it visualizable, automated, something to collect. I think in my experience, I've seen at larger volume, ingestion of logs is a big bottleneck, like making sure that portion is taken care of. Like either you're using some tooling at the message broker or some at scale, but it's really important that you actually don't drop these things. That's all. That's to make sure you're getting all the insights and you're not missing out on certain key aspects. And what that informs you is it gives you an idea of how your product has been. It helps you filter and even understand at the time of incident whether something has gone awry or it's actually behaving as expected. And then I know Asaf mentioned that runbooks are no longer in play in companies, but I would still value them as like deriving insights from past incidents. So when something occurs, if a new engineer joins, they would have the runbook at their disposal to go back and look and say, oh, I've said recognize this log message. I think that's the problem. I'll go and fix it if it's not fixed already. So I think deriving insights from logging and making sure you understand how your app behaves and using that to inform incidents or other product insights is really valuable for the business.
Okay. Tanvi, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think I'm good. Nilesh covered it.
Okay. Asaf, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think obviously we've talked about kind of like troubleshooting and decreasing incident time, which is the most important thing that logs are there for. I think one of the things which is going to be really, really interesting for organizations is kind of like maybe post troubleshooting ensuring that all the information that was needed in order to do the troubleshooting existed in the logs. It's often that it's not the case. Sometimes you troubleshoot and you realize you're missing some information, and then you have to dig through the code, maybe do some code changes and push it straight to production again. I think this is something that is part of the debrief that we do when we guide organizations to do post incident, to understand, did I have all the information I need in order to troubleshoot it in the most effective and efficient way? And if this is the case, then it's fine, but this is what I think the most of the use for logs is in the systems today.
Okay. So let's move on to the next question here. What are the most common mistakes companies make when setting up their log management strategy, and how can they avoid them? Tanvi, can you speak to this one?
Sure, Matt. And I think what a perfect chronology of the question, right? Like, I think you're going from Asaf just mentioning what he just spoke about to common mistakes in log management, right? Couple of things that, from my experience that I have seen here is the log management strategies, the log leveling, the data security around the logs, right? Also piggybacking on our responsible usage of logs kind of a situation there, right? And not having proper alerting mechanisms around the logging to filter out the noise, I think are the common mistakes that I have seen. And I think Asaf also mentioned one of those is like too much logging, right? Like, do we need that much of information? Do we want to see every step of the story, or we can skip some pages in the story? Nilesh, piggybacking on your analogy there, love that analogy, right? Some pages are probably not needed in the book, so let's just cut those out, right? So having some of those strategies, I think, are much needed. And companies in the midst of probably building things too fast or pushing things out faster miss out on some of these foundational aspects of log diving or log setup or management, and then it creates a problem when any incident happens or things are not running in an appropriate manner, right? So having that strategy and not missing on to these key points of adding levels to log, creating a strategy around log management, security, too much logging, cost management around logging should be some things that are common pitfalls and probably easy to take care of if done well right from the start.
Okay. Nilesh, do you have anything to add?
I think maybe one nuance I would add is, I think this is mentioned before, but like at least tagging a lot of the logs with the right metadata. Like, let's say it's coming from one machine or the other, just having a very tight association so that you can go back and see, okay, whether it's one specific machine that's broken or whether it's a bunch of, whether it's like a load balancer, the identity of where that source is coming from, that's also very key. But I think the rest is covered. Just wanted to add that one tiny insight.
Okay. Asaf, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think the most common mistake that we see is a company saving either too many logs or too few logs. So it's either costing too much money or it is either not useful for them enough to troubleshoot. And this is a balance that you need to strike and you need to understand it. And I think it's kind of like a moving target as well as companies mature, as they care more about the cost, then I think it's something that they need to do. So common strategy, like we started this conversation and like Tanvi and Nilesh mentioned, it's about the structure. It's about understanding what's important, what's not important. It's about saving the logs at the right tier and making sure that the cost is kind of like aligned with the value that you get on it. So we see companies that save a lot of logs and then they say we can't use it because like it's too much, it's not useful, we can't understand what's going on. We see companies that are saving too little. They're only saving the errors and the exception, but it doesn't tell you the whole story, just tell you what happened. But now I want to go through the flow of how did I get to this exception and now it's missing. So striking the balance between how many logs you save and which tiers you save them is something which is important. And the mistakes we see companies not putting enough thought into it in the beginning of the process, and then it becomes a big mess. And you go to the engineering and say, okay, now we have to reduce it from 20 terabyte to 2 terabyte a day. And they're like, We don't have no idea how to do it. I think we need all of it, and it becomes like a very complicated project to do. So thinking about things in advance, obviously it's a good strategy, not only with logging. Yeah.
Okay. I think in our last 5 minutes or so, we're going to pivot to some audience questions. So this is an interesting one. I'm going to paraphrase the question. We've been talking about logs mostly in terms of system metrics. And so the question here is, have you ever been in a situation where you're using system logs or metrics as a proxy for product metrics? Like, for example, like in an early stage recommender system, you can imagine using like logs in place of impressions if you don't have proper impressions, or like access logs in place of impressions. And so is this something that you've seen? And I think this kind of crosses into, I'm going to say log abuse. That might be a bit extreme, but have you ever been in a situation where you have to say like, hey, don't use that log to mean this other business specific thing, because number one, we don't want to support that. Number two, that might be dangerous or misleading. Let me start with you, Nilesh. Have you ever seen a situation like this?
I don't think so. I've mostly been on the side of where like debugging, mostly understanding the logging to inform about the app, but I don't think that's exactly translated. I think metrics collection would be somewhat a different workflow or different way to collect insights. Like I would either store it somewhere, persist it somewhere versus inferring from logs. So I think metrics collection and product insight should derive from something more deterministic than just like trying to piece together logs and maybe even counters or adding some requests or something. But yeah, that's my 2 cents, because I've not seen this personally, so I don't know what the others have.
Yeah, I think the word infer is a good one there. Tanvi, have you seen a situation like this or have any related experience?
And not an exactly similar situation, but probably slightly closer or relatable, right? Like, and I think the inference part and using logging can be one of the factors when it comes to differentiating between actually the system and the product, right? Because if I try to understand the question better, like there is a system and your product is running because or on top of that system, right? So you need to have some kind of strategy or metrics to monitor your system, but do they act as a feeder to the actual application or product? That's something which is probably business use case dependent or product dependent, or what actually the product is trying to achieve, right? And if that's important, then yes, let's do it, right? But if it is not, then it's going to be noise, and you might want to keep those two things separate, right? That's just me logically thinking about the question and how I would do it if I was faced with something like this.
Okay. Asaf, can you speak to this one?
Yeah, we've seen it quite a few times. I have to say that from our experience, it doesn't really work because when you look at stuff from the system or the proxy level and you don't monitor like the front end or how the application is performing, you usually get a lot more information that you need, and it's hard for you to trace what is actually going on because some of the information is being lost when it goes to the system itself or the infrastructure itself, and so it's really hard to generate. And I think it's really important to pick the right tool for the right mission. So if you want product metrics, there are solutions that do product metrics. And they're very good at what they do, and you get all the capabilities. The other thing is logs. Each log line is separate. Imagine that you have like a distributed system. Now you start getting some collision between a call that a user made on his system between a different user that made on their system. The flow is interrupted, and you don't get the whole flow beginning to end like you would get with a product metric solution that is dedicated for that. We've seen it. It doesn't really work in large scale distributed system. Part of the risks also is that some of the information that exists on the back end is potential of risking privacy information. So because when the system is on the back end, it connects to all the databases, it connects to whatever you need, so that the information is basically open. When you deal with the front end itself, so for example, some of the information is being encrypted, some of the information is being obfuscated, so it's not going to be presented to the user. Recording stuff on the back end has a potential of saving username, email addresses, stuff that is PII today. And I think with organizations today, you want to minimize or at least have a very detailed knowledge of where the private information is being stored. So we've seen it. I wouldn't personally recommend it for various reasons that I mentioned.
Okay. I think we'll take one more audience question. In the world of microservices, each microservice developer will create their own log format or could create their own log format. How do you make sure that you're able to correlate the logs across microservices? Nilesh, can you speak to this one?
I think consistency is key. In the absence of it, it's just going to be a little bit more difficult to piece together. You'd have to involve multiple teams and talk to their respective people to understand, oh, why is this represented this way? Let's say in a really high pressure scenario, you have to debug some things, and then you have to infer these things without the knowledge, and you have to involve a lot of people. And a takeaway from that incident could be, let's standardize some of the logging format across these services, and which is a harder thing, like different languages, different teams, different priorities. It might be harder to integrate, but if there's a decent surface area of commonality, you can probably use a single library and say, okay, set up log with this kind of configuration, and that can somewhat help alleviate this. Yes, there would be like older formats, and migrating with that would have some problem, but that's where I would approach. You could even keep the basic ones, just basic structure of just a time, log level, message, as the standard logging output would go as an append-only log. But anything more structured would always help across the board, so that teams can visualize and see, okay, this line means this action is happening, or this message is particularly received. So yeah, that's where I have.
Okay. Tanvi, can you speak to this one?
No, I think Nilesh actually covered what exactly was going on in my mind, right? Like, just to sum it up, I think it helps to build the correlation and then probably reach to a root cause analysis kind of a situation.
Okay. Asaf, do you have anything to say about correlating logs across services?
Yes. So first of all, some of the information can be logged from the microservice itself. So if you're running in Kubernetes, you can log the pod name, the node name, the cluster name, all the relevant information you can just append it, and you don't need to write it in the log. You can just edit when you write a log in an automated way. I think it's important it's also creating a balance between autonomy, that every engineering team who's developing a microservice wants to have the autonomy to do whatever they want, and the need of the business to actually troubleshoot when things happen. So keeping to minimum the amount of structured fields. So if I care about the customer, I need to make sure that every log line has a customer ID or customer name, and it has the same concept of them. If I care about customer tiers, that I need to make sure that I record the pro and enterprise or whatever customers I have. So I need to be able to define like the minimum set of fields that I want to have in every log line, and then give the teams the autonomy that they need. But it has to be kind of like a negotiation. We see a lot of companies as they scale, setting up an observability team, and it's not only for logging but also for metrics. That team kind of like sets the guidelines on how to log, how to do the logging, how to record metrics, how to run traces. And they're like the knowledge center for the entire company around it. So that's what I would say. It's balance, it's people, and they need to understand the bigger picture when they write the logs.
Okay. And with that, we are at time. So thanks to our panelists for sharing all of your great insights and experiences. We appreciate it. We will now all be heading over to the Lead Dev Slack in the continuous learning channel. So please visit us there to continue the discussion. And thanks for joining, everyone, and we hope to see you next time.